when Ethan Walker, a wealthy businessman in Santa Barbara, installed hidden cameras to confirm a growing suspicion about his girlfriend. He never expected the truth to be this cruel. While Trish Coleman left his newly adopted infant triplets crying for hours, it was Maria Santos, the quiet housekeeper, who held them, soothed them, and saved them. In that moment, Ethan's entire world shifted, forcing him to confront a reality he could no longer ignore and decide who truly belonged in his family. Ethan Walker had always trusted his instincts, the very instincts that built an empire from nothing and turned him into one of California's most respected businessmen. But for the first time in years, those instincts weren't warning him about a bad investment, a risky partnership, or a crumbling market. They were warning him about the woman who slept beside him every night. Something about Trish Coleman's recent behavior didn't match the polished image she presented to the world, and Ethan felt the weight of that unease growing heavier by the day. He couldn't shake the feeling that beneath her glamorous smile and flawless poise was someone who didn't belong near the 3 infants he had recently brought into his home. And once a feeling like that took root, Ethan knew better than to ignore it. He had built everything he owned on reading people correctly. He would be a fool not to read her now. Trish had come into his life only 2 months after he adopted the triplets Aid and Liam. And no 3 tiny boys who had been left at the entrance of a foster care center in Los Angeles with nothing but their given hospital bracelets and a note begging for a chance at a better life. Ethan remembered holding them for the first time, each no bigger than his forearm, and feeling something in his heart break open. For years after losing his wife in a tragic accident, he thought fatherhood had slipped away from him completely. But when the social worker called and told him 3 newborns needed a home immediately, something inside him said yes before he could even think. And he never regretted it, not for a second. What he did regret deeply was letting Trish into their world so quickly. At first she had seemed captivated by the babies, eager to take photos with them, eager to show them off at social gatherings as if she had stepped into a fairy tale life. But Ethan eventually realized she was more captivated by how others reacted to her when she posed as a doting girlfriend. When it was just the 2 of them with the babies, something shifted. The warmth drained from her expression, the patience dissolved, the tenderness vanished. In its place was irritation, followed by complaints, followed by comments she thought Ethan didn't hear. He wanted to believe he was imagining it. He wanted to believe stress was getting to her. He wanted to believe that adjusting to life with 3 infants was overwhelming for anyone. But the truth was simpler and far more painful. She didn't care for the children, not even a little. It was Maria Santos, the housekeeper he had hired months before the adoption, who seemed to understand the babies better than anyone else. Maria was the kind of woman who moved through the world with effortless gentleness, someone who worked 3 jobs while raising her daughter alone, someone who knew how to hold a baby as if she had been born for it. Ethan often caught her humming while she cleaned or chatting with Julia about school as they folded laundry together. He trusted her, respected her, and admired the kind of strength she carried without ever showing off. As the weeks passed, he noticed more and more that any time he returned home early, Maria was the one soothing the babies even on days she wasn't scheduled to work yet, while Trish lounged in the outdoor cabana scrolling through her phone or sipping cocktails. Every time Ethan asked how the day had gone, Trish said the same thing: everything was great. But the baby's puffy eyes and red cheeks told a different story. Still, Ethan didn't want to accuse her without proof. He had seen what accusations could do to a relationship, and he wasn't a man who operated on assumptions. So he kept watching, and he kept feeling that same uneasy tug in his chest, pulling harder each day. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening when he arrived home earlier than expected. He walked into the foyer, briefcase in hand, expecting to hear the soft babbling of the triplets or Trish's voice somewhere in the house. Instead, he heard a distant wail, one that didn't stop, didn't weaken, didn't pause. It was the unmistakable cry of a baby who had been calling for too long. Ethan followed the sound to the nursery and froze at the doorway. All 3 babies lay in their cribs crying, their faces flushed, their fists trembling. No bottle, no toys, no sign of Trish. He ran to them immediately, scooping up Aiden first, patting Liam's back with his other hand, trying to shush No with his voice alone. He rocked them, held them close, kissed their heads. It took 20 exhausting minutes before their crying softened, before their breathing steadied against his chest. He wasn't angry yet. He wasn't even hurt yet. He was confused. But confusion quickly turned into something darker when he looked around the nursery and saw 3 untouched bottles still sitting on the shelf. Each one cold as if they'd been prepared hours earlier but never used. Something inside him hardened right then, something protective, fierce, unyielding. He laid the babies down gently and went looking for Trish. He found her by the pool with a glass of wine in her hand, laughing on a video call with a friend, complaining about being stuck with 3 nonstop screamers and needing a spa weekend to recover. Ethan didn't confront her. Not then. He just stood there, watching her, realizing that everything he feared might actually be true. And once a truth like that took shape, there was no going back. That night, long after the babies were asleep and the house grew quiet, Ethan sat alone in his office with the Pacific breeze drifting through the open balcony doors. He stared at his computer screen, at the search results for home surveillance systems. It wasn't something he ever thought he would resort to. But he needed answers. He needed to protect his sons. He needed to know exactly what was happening when he wasn't home. Within an hour, he had placed an order for a set of discreet, high-definition cameras, the kind used in high-end security installations. Within 2 days, they arrived. And before dawn on the 3rd morning, while Trish was asleep in the master bedroom, Ethan installed them throughout the house with precision and care detectors disguised as vents, small lenses hidden behind decorative molding, audio receivers tucked into corners no one would ever notice. He didn't do it out of paranoia. He did it out of love. Love for 3 little boys who depended on him entirely. Love for the family he had fought so hard to build. Love for the truth, even if the truth was something he wished desperately wasn't real. By the time the sun rose above the horizon, casting warm light across the living room floor, Ethan Walker sat in front of 6 small monitors, watching the home he thought he understood and bracing himself for whatever he was about to discover. From the moment Ethan welcomed the triplets into his Santa Barbara home, he knew life would never look the same again. What he didn't expect was how differently Trish Coleman would respond when the lights, cameras, and social attention faded away. On the surface, Trish embodied everything the world praised: poised, glamorous, impossibly stunning, and socially magnetic. She built her career on being adored, photographed, and talked about, and she carried that reputation into every room she entered. When she first visited Ethan's home and saw the triplets lying in their cribs, she put on a performance so polished that even Ethan had been convinced. She cooed at them, took sweet photos, and talked eagerly about how excited she was to help raise them. But now Ethan realized those moments had only ever appeared when someone else was present to witness them. In the early days of their relationship, Trish acted as if she had stepped naturally into the role of the loving girlfriend who embraced 3 babies as though destiny had placed them into her arms. She made sure to schedule brunches with friends where she could slide photos across the table and beam proudly as everyone commented on how extraordinary she was for dating a man with newborns. It was the type of story her influencer circle ate up for: a glamorous woman proving she was down to earth, compassionate, and modern enough to handle an unconventional family. Ethan had believed her intentions were genuine, then he had wanted to believe it. After years of grieving and loneliness, Trish's attention felt like a miracle, something he didn't dare question. But the more time she spent around the babies without an audience, the more her facade fractured. It started with small slips. She would wince at the sound of one of them waking from a nap, muttering something under her breath. She would roll her eyes when Aiden spit up on her blouse, complaining that she didn't sign up to be covered in baby stuff all day. She never changed their diapers unless Ethan asked, and even then she acted like she was stepping onto a battlefield. Ethan brushed it off at first, telling himself she just needed time to adjust. Parenting, especially parenting 3 infants, wasn't something most people eased into effortlessly. But the unease grew in Ethan every time he caught a glimpse of her expression when she thought no one else was looking. The warm smile vanished, replaced by something cold and impatient. Trish had perfected the art of slipping back into character the moment she heard footsteps. But Ethan had still seen enough to question what else she hid. And yet when he tried to talk to her, she seemed to know exactly how to deflect, how to reassure him, how to steer the conversation back into her control. That manipulation, soft, subtle, wrapped in charm, began to unsettle him more than her obvious irritation toward the babies. On social media, Trish played the role of doting mother figure flawlessly. She posted aesthetic photos of Ethan's backyard, her manicured nails beside Liam's tiny hand, captions about unexpected blessings and learning the beauty of motherhood. Ethan's friends commented on how lucky he was to have found someone who embraced his new life so naturally. His family admired her for stepping in so soon after he had adopted. Everyone praised her, and every compliment reinforced the image she so carefully crafted. What no one saw was what happened once the phone was set down, once the photos were uploaded, once the filters were applied. The moment her audience disappeared, so did the affection. Sometimes, if Ethan walked into a room unexpectedly, he noticed the stiffness in her posture, the way she set her jaw, the way her gaze hardened for a split second before she softened it again and asked a rehearsed question like, "Do Do you need help with them, babe? It wasn't just the babies she pulled away from. She also began withdrawing from Ethan himself whenever responsibility entered the picture. If he asked her to hold no while he prepared bottles, she suddenly had urgent calls. If he suggested she join him for pediatric appointments, she insisted she had brand commitments or meetings with her team. He understood that her career required attention, but there was a difference between having work and using work as an escape. His first confirmation that something was deeply wrong came one Tuesday morning. He had returned home from a short business errand, expecting to find Trish and the triplets together. Instead, he found Trish in the upstairs lounge taking photos in front of the floor-to-ceiling window while the babies cried in the next room. She didn't even seem to hear them, or maybe she simply didn't care to. Ethan froze at the threshold, watching her shift into different poses, examining herself in her camera screen, adjusting the drape of her dress while the cries grew louder. When she finally noticed him, she spun around and plastered on a sweet, "Breathe, obey!" I was just about to check on them. Ethan wanted to believe her, but he couldn't ignore the truth he had seen with his own eyes. Something within him twisted painfully. Trish wasn't overwhelmed, she was indifferent. The babies weren't part of her future, they were obstacles. From then on, the pattern only became clearer. In front of guests, she cradled the boys like they were priceless treasures. She insisted on being the one to bring them out during dinners, relished in the compliments, and made sure everyone knew how connected she felt to them. But when the house emptied and the praising voices faded, Trish avoided even looking in their direction. Ethan noticed the way she always walked past the nursery with quick steps, as if afraid she might be asked to do something inconvenient. Her resentment surfaced more openly with time. She complained about having no freedom, about losing her social life, about feeling tied down by someone else's choices. She never outright insulted the babies in front of Ethan, but the tone of her voice when she spoke of them said everything she dared not put into words. Ethan tried convincing himself that she simply wasn't used to responsibility, that her glamorous lifestyle had conditioned her to avoid anything messy or demanding. He told himself she cared for him enough to eventually bond with the children. He told himself patience would fix everything, but deep down he knew patience couldn't create love where none existed, and the woman Trish became when no one watched was a stranger, beautiful, magnetic, but hollow in the places where warmth should have lived. Ethan began noticing patterns, how she always made sure to be photographed with the babies but never held them outside of those moments, how she lit up when invited to luxury events but dimmed the second she heard one of the triplets stir from a nap, how her compliments toward Ethan disappeared whenever the babies needed him and interrupted her plans. He realized that she wasn't just indifferent, she was annoyed by the mere existence of the children. What made everything worse was how easily she twisted her attitude back into sweetness whenever she sensed Ethan watching. She knew how to charm him, how to soothe the doubts, how to act like the ideal partner for a man with a public image like his. And because Ethan wanted so desperately to build a family again, he had overlooked the coldness hiding in her eyes when she looked at the cribs. But the babies were too young to speak, too young to defend themselves, and too young to escape her indifference. It was that helplessness that gnawed at Ethan the most. He couldn't rely on their cries to tell him what happened when he wasn't around. He needed the truth. He needed confirmation. He needed to see who Trish really was when she believed no one could see her. And that need for clarity was what pushed him to take the drastic step that would unravel everything. After weeks of growing unease, Ethan began noticing the same unmistakable pattern. Trish Coleman became a completely different person whenever there wasn't an audience. She slipped out of her polished social persona the moment she believed no one was watching. The woman who smiled radiantly during family gatherings or cooed sweetly at the babies for her Instagram stories evaporated into someone sharp, impatient, and uninterested. It wasn't gradual, it was instant, like flipping a switch. And once Ethan recognized it, he saw it everywhere. It happened during mornings when he pretended to be running late, but lingered near the staircase long enough to watch her roll her eyes at the triplets' cries before forcing a cheerful mask on as soon as she heard his footsteps. It happened during afternoons when friends visited and she practically sprinted to grab one of the babies, gushing loudly about how motherhood had softened her heart, only to shove the child back into a crib the moment the door closed behind the guests. Ethan observed it in her voice too, how it shifted from sugary warmth to an irritated hiss, how her tone flattened whenever she was alone with the children, how every word she spoke in private dripped with annoyance that she worked so hard to hide in public. The disconnect was jarring, and the more he saw it, the more Ethan felt something heavy sink inside his chest. He had always believed character was revealed in the smallest, most unguarded moments. His father used to tell him that anyone could look kind when the world applauded, but only genuine hearts stayed kind when no one was there to reward them. Trish failed that test every day. She passed the public one flawlessly, though. Whenever they attended charity galas, she carried herself like a modern-day saint, telling reporters how deeply she admired Ethan's decision to adopt 3 infants. She shared stories about reading parenting books and waking up at night to check on them, stories Ethan knew were complete fabrications. The press adored her, her followers adored her. Even Ethan's own mother said more than once how incredible it was that a woman like Trish had stepped so naturally into such a demanding situation. But all that praise only made Trish crave more. She loved the admiration, the perception of being selfless and nurturing, the attention that came with looking like a future wife and mother. What she didn't love was the reality of it. The reality of it was messy diapers, spit-up stains, feeding schedules, and crying at unpredictable hours, and Trish wanted none of that. Ethan realized that she didn't want children, she wanted the image of being someone who wanted children. He tried convincing himself that maybe she was overwhelmed, maybe she needed more time, maybe small cracks didn't mean she was incapable of changing. But he couldn't ignore the moments when her facade slipped completely. Sometimes he walked into a room unexpectedly and caught her staring at the babies with a look that was neither fear nor frustration, it was resentment, as if they had ruined some fantasy she had built in her mind, as if they were obstacles standing in the way of the glamorous life she believed she deserved. Ethan never confronted her in those moments. He would enter the room softly, clearing his throat or pretending he needed something. She always snapped back into her performance the second she saw him, rushing to pick up one of the boys while wearing a falsely tender expression. She acted as though the child had just been laughing with her, as if the cries echoing through the house were somehow unrelated to her inattention. She was good at it, too good, and her talent for switching personas made the whole situation feel even more unsettling. Ethan was beginning to question his own judgment. How had he not seen through her earlier? How had he let someone like her into one of the most vulnerable chapters of his life? She hadn't tricked him through lies alone, she had tricked him through timing. She had come into his life at a moment when he desperately wanted connection, when he was still learning how to navigate single fatherhood. He had been lonely, overwhelmed, grieving the life he thought he would have, and Trish knew exactly how to step into that gap. But Ethan was no stranger to manipulation. He had seen plenty of it in business. He knew what people looked like when they tried to mold him into something convenient for them. The difference here was that he never expected to encounter it in his own home, around children who couldn't defend themselves. The more he observed Trish, the more he realized she wasn't simply uninterested, she was calculated. She understood exactly who she needed to impress to maintain her image as the public, Ethan, his family, his friends. Everyone except the babies, because in her mind they had no power. They couldn't call her out, they couldn't expose her. They couldn't ruin her reputation. That sense of immunity empowered her to show her true colors in the spaces that were meant to be safest for the children. One afternoon, everything Ethan suspected became undeniable. He had returned from a meeting early, walking through the house with the intention of checking on Aiden, who hadn't been feeling well that morning. As he approached the living room, he heard Trish's bright, performative voice float through the air. She was on the phone with a friend, talking animatedly about some upcoming photo shoot. But when Ethan stepped closer, her tone shifted drastically. He heard her say, "Honestly, I can't stand being stuck here all day with those 3. I swear, if I hear one more cry, I'm going to lose it. Ethan thinks I'm some natural caretaker, please. I just pretend long enough to get through his family dinners." The words hit him harder than he expected, not because they surprised him, they didn't, but because they confirmed everything he had been trying not to admit. He stood frozen just outside her line of sight, clutching the railing of the staircase as an ache spread through his chest. He wasn't angry yet, he was disappointed deeply. He had opened his heart, his home, and his children's lives to someone who only wanted the benefits of being seen, not the responsibility of being there. When Trish ended the call and walked upstairs humming as if nothing were wrong, Ethan realized she had crossed a line he could never uncross. That evening he watched her at dinner. She sat at the head of the table, beautifully dressed, smiling at everyone with a grace that made her seem like the perfect partner. She laughed at stories, complimented the food, asked Ethan's mother about her weekend plans, and the entire time Ethan watched her the same way he would watch a stranger, curiously, distantly, almost analytically. Every gesture felt scripted, every smile felt rehearsed, and every word she spoke sounded calculated to maintain the illusion she had built. He couldn't shake the image of her earlier that day, complaining about the children as though they were burdens rather than lives he cherished more than anything. He couldn't forget the indifference in her voice, the entitlement in her tone, the complete lack of empathy she showed toward 3 helpless infants. That was the moment Ethan knew he needed answers, not guesses, not suspicions, hard proof. Real evidence of who she was when he wasn't around. And that meant watching her without interference. Watching her when she believed she was entirely unseen. Watching her when her mask slipped so completely that even she stopped pretending. What he didn't yet know was that the truth he was preparing to uncover would break him far more than any business betrayal ever had, but it would also save his children in ways he couldn't imagine. Ethan knew that suspicion without evidence could destroy a relationship just as quickly as the truth could. And even though every instinct in him screamed that something was wrong, he refused to make a life-altering decision based only on intuition. He needed to see what happened when he wasn't home. He needed to know how Trish treated the boys when her audience was gone and her performance ended. So he did something he never imagined he would do, not for business, not even for personal reasons. He decided to watch the woman he was dating from behind a screen, through cameras she didn't know existed. It felt strange, even invasive, but Ethan reminded himself why he was doing it. These were 3 infants' children who depended on him for their entire world. They had no voice, no protection, no way to escape someone who might not want them. If he turned away from his instincts and they were right, he would never forgive himself. Installing the cameras wasn't difficult. Ethan ordered a high-end security system typically used by wealthy homeowners concerned about break-ins. The devices blended into the design of the house, small, discreet, and undetectable. He placed them only in common areas: the nursery, the kitchen, the living room, the hallways. He respected privacy even in this extreme circumstance. The master bedroom remained untouched, but the rooms where the triplets spent most of their time, those were essential. At dawn, before Trish woke up, Ethan moved through the house, placing each camera with precision. He adjusted them behind vents, tucked them into corners where shadows would disguise their presence, and synced them to a password-protected monitor hidden in his office, one only he could access. As he worked, anxiety mixed with heartbreak. He didn't want the cameras to prove his suspicion right. He wanted to be wrong. He wanted the footage to show nothing but a woman overwhelmed but trying. He wanted to watch her hold the babies with tenderness and feel embarrassed for doubting her. But the way his chest tightened told him he wasn't preparing for relief. He was preparing for impact. When the installation was complete, Ethan stood in his office staring at 6 screens that displayed every angle of his home. For a moment he hesitated. Once he turned them on, there was no returning to ignorance. Whatever he saw would change things. It would force decisions. It would end the lies he'd been telling himself. And yet, he pressed the button. The monitors blinked to life, revealing the nursery bathed in morning light, the kitchen still empty, and the living room quiet. Trish was upstairs still asleep, but Ethan didn't have to wait long before the first test came. Aiden began fussing in his crib. Liam soon followed, as he often did, and Noah kicked his tiny legs in response to the growing noise. Ethan watched the nursery feed as the cries grew louder. The babies weren't wailing yet, but they were getting their babies who needed someone to pick them up, someone to feed them, someone to whisper to them as they shook off sleep. For almost 10 minutes, no one came. Ethan's jaw tightened. He checked the hallway feed, no movement. The kitchen feed empty. The stairs still empty. Finally, Trish's bedroom door opened. She stepped out wearing a satin robe, her hair shiny and immaculate even at that early hour. She walked down the hall with the slow, irritated pace of someone being forced to get up against her will. When she entered the nursery, Ethan leaned closer to the monitor. He wanted to see if she would pick them up, if she would at least try, but Trish didn't touch a single child. She stood at the doorway, arms folded, and muttered something under her breath. She paced twice, glanced toward the cribs as though assessing whether she truly had to be there, and then lifted her phone to check her notifications. Ethan felt a prick in his chest, not anger, not yet. Just a kind of heartbreak that came with watching someone he once trusted reveal a truth he no longer could deny. The twins' cries intensified. Trish Winston pressed her fingers to her temples. She walked over to Liam's crib and looked down, but instead of picking him up, she adjusted the pacifier next to him without giving it to him. Then she straightened up and left the nursery entirely. Ethan watched her disappear into the kitchen. She poured herself a slow cup of coffee, added flavored creamer, stirred it with care, and lifted it to her lips, completely ignoring the cries echoing through the house. Only when the babies reached full screaming did she sigh dramatically, walk briskly back to the nursery, and lift exactly one child, Aiden, because he was closest to the door. But even then, she didn't cradle him. She held him at arm's length, as if afraid he might drop something on her robe. She bounced him once, then set him back into the crib when his cries didn't stop immediately. Ethan's stomach twisted. He had expected indifference, but he hadn't expected disregard. Trish's irritation grew louder through the audio feed. She told the babies they were too much, that Ethan needed to hire someone to deal with them, and that she wasn't about to waste her morning on screaming. Then she left the room again, letting the 3 boys wail until their tiny bodies shook. Ethan's hand hovered near the doorknob of his office. He wanted to rush out there to grab his sons, to hold them, to end their distress. But he forced himself to stay. If he ran to them now, he would tip off Trish. She would become cautious. She would hide her behavior. And he needed to see every truth, every slip, every reveal, every moment she believed she was alone with them. That afternoon, Ethan witnessed something that made his chest ache in a completely different way. Maria Santos arrived early for her shift, her hair pulled into a loose ponytail, her daughter Julia quietly trailing behind her with a small backpack. Maria paused at the front door listening. When she heard the babies crying, she didn't hesitate. She rushed toward the nursery, her expression tightening with concern. Ethan watched her scoop up Aiden, hold him against her chest, kiss his forehead, and whisper to him. She reached for Liam next, moving with practiced tenderness, and then soothed No with gentle bouncing. The babies responded instantly, their cries softening, their faces relaxing. Ethan felt his throat tighten. There was no performance here, no audience. Just a woman who cared deeply and acted on that care with instinct and sincerity. Maria began changing their diapers, humming softly, loving them the way only someone who truly wanted to be there could. And Ethan knew, without needing further confirmation, that the cameras weren't just exposing the truth about Trish. They were revealing the truth about someone else entirely, someone who had been there all along, offering the kind of love and protection the babies desperately needed. It was then Ethan knew one thing for sure: the cameras were not a mistake. They were the beginning of uncovering who really belonged in his home, and who never should have stepped foot in it. Ethan had braced himself for indifference. He had prepared to see impatience. But nothing could have readied him for the harshness that unfolded across his screens day after day. Each morning he woke before the sun, brewed a pot of coffee he never finished, and sank into the leather chair in front of the monitors. The nursery cam fed into the largest screen, and every time he watched it, his shoulders tensed with the dread of what he might witness next. The first few recordings had already unsettled him, but as hours passed and the footage piled up, a pattern emerged, one that tore at him far deeper than he expected. Trish didn't just neglect the babies, she despised them. On day 4 of surveillance, the triplets woke around 7 a.m., their soft fussing gradually turning into cries. Trish entered the room wearing designer sunglasses, even though the curtains were still drawn. She muttered complaints under her breath, tossing her hair over her shoulder with an exasperated flick. Not again, she groaned as she approached the cribs. She didn't bother checking diapers or offering pacifiers. Instead, she hovered near the doorway and announced loudly, "You need to stop. Seriously, stop crying." She acted as though the boys were choosing to disturb her, as though they were capable of understanding her frustration. Ethan watched, jaw clenched, unable to comprehend how a grown woman could stand in front of 3 tiny infants and deliver irritation instead of care. Things only escalated from there. Around noon, when the boys woke from their nap hungry and restless, Trish entered the nursery holding her phone against her ear. She didn't greet the babies. She didn't even glance at them. She walked straight to the window, opened the blinds, and complained to whoever was on the other end of the line. "I swear, Ethan is getting way too comfortable with this whole dad of 3 thing. He doesn't need to be doing all of this. It's ridiculous. I mean, what woman wants to date a man with 3 newborns? This is not the life I signed up for." Her voice carried a bitterness that made Ethan's chest tighten. She spoke about the babies as though they were hurdles she had to jump over to keep her place in Ethan's life. She talked about him as though he were naive for loving them. Then she said something that twisted like a knife. "Honestly, I could tolerate one is manageable. But 3? No. He needs to get rid of them. I don't care how he does it, but he needs to." She laughed after she said it, a light, careless laugh that didn't match the cruelty of her words. Ethan leaned in closer to the screen, unable to look away. He watched his sons cry as Trish continued pacing, fully engaged in her conversation, acting as though their wails were nothing but ambient noise. She didn't pick them up. She didn't soothe them. She didn't acknowledge their existence. By the time she finally hung up, the boys had cried themselves into sweaty exhaustion. Trish approached the cribs only to toss a blanket erratically across the rails, clearly irritated by the sound, and snapped, "You redoing this on purpose, aren't you?" That was the moment Ethan felt something inside him fracture, not just disappointment, not just anger, but a deep, protective fury that made his pulse throb in his temples. No child deserved to be spoken to that way. No human being with a conscience could justify it. He lifted his hand toward the door, ready to storm out of his office and confront her. But he froze, fingers wrapped tightly around the knob. If he intervened now, she would change her behavior. She would adapt. She would fake affection more convincingly, and he needed the truth every raw, unfiltered second of it. So he forced himself to sit back down, though every muscle in his body protested. The next few days cemented everything Ethan feared. Trish's cruelty became bolder when she believed no one was watching. She often left the babies unattended for long stretches while she lounged by the pool, browsed online stores, or filmed makeup tutorials. She fed them late. She changed them only when the smell became overwhelming. At one point, she even leaned over the crib and said in a cold tone, "Do you know how lucky you are? Ethan loves you. If it were up to me, I'd have sent you back already." Ethan's hands shook as he watched. His sons were 3 months old, helpless, innocent, unable to even hold their heads up steadily. Yet Trish looked at them with the kind of resentment he had only ever seen in people who felt burdened by responsibility they never wanted. The worst moment came on a Saturday afternoon when the babies woke early from their nap, hungry and whimpering. Trish was in the kitchen blending a smoothie. She glanced toward the baby monitor on the counter, the one Ethan had bought for her convenience, and then purposefully turned the volume off. She finished making her drink, snapped a photo of it for her social media, and headed outside to tan by the pool. Ethan watched from the monitors as each minute passed in agonizing slowness. Aiden cried first, them then no. Their cries grew desperate, frantic, exhausting. Trish didn't return. She stretched out on a lounge chair, scrolling through her phone, fully aware of the sound echoing faintly through the house yet choosing to ignore it. It wasn't until nearly 40 minutes later when Maria arrived early that Ethan felt air return to his lungs. Maria entered, heard the cries, and rushed straight to the nursery. The moment she picked the babies up, their sobs softened. She rocked them, wiping their tears, whispering reassurances that made Ethan's chest ache with gratitude. She didn't look annoyed. She didn't complain. She didn't hesitate. She responded the way a mother would. She fed them, changed them, reorganized their blankets, and sat with them on the floor until they fully calmed. Watching the contrast between Maria's instinctive kindness and Trish's cold disregard was like watching two different worlds collide. And for Ethan, the truth had never been clearer. Maria cared for the boys genuinely, deeply, wholeheartedly. Trish didn't care at all. Ethan remained still for a long time after the footage ended, staring at the dark screen where the recording paused. He couldn't yet confront Trish, not until he had collected everything he needed. But something inside him had already made its decision. His sons deserved better. They deserved love, safety, gentleness, and a home free from resentment. And Ethan Walker would burn every bridge necessary to give them exactly that. Ethan had expected the footage to reveal neglect. He had braced himself for frustration, carelessness, maybe even intolerance. But what he didn't expect was the unmistakable tenderness that appeared every time Maria Santos entered the frame. Each moment she stepped into the nursery, it was as if the entire atmosphere shifted, the tension dissolved, the cries softened. The babies seemed to recognize her presence even before she touched them. Watching her through the monitor felt like witnessing the exact kind of compassion Ethan had hoped would surround his sons when he first brought them home. It made him realize just how deeply she had woven herself into their world without ever asking for recognition. The contrast between Trish and Maria grew clearer with every passing day. When Trish walked into a room, the babies didn't respond. They didn't perk up, they didn't kick their legs, they didn't attempt their early babbling. But when Maria arrived, even from the far hallway, the triplets reacted with unmistakable excitement. Their tiny arms wiggled, their eyes widened. Their cries dissolved into little hiccups of eagerness. It was a reaction Ethan had once hoped they would have for him. Now, watching the monitors, he didn't feel jealousy. He felt gratitude. Real, overwhelming gratitude. Because someone in that house was giving them the kind of affection they deserved. One Wednesday morning, the cameras captured a moment Ethan would never forget. Trish had left the boys in their cribs for nearly an hour while scrolling through her phone on the living room couch. The baby's cries had escalated to that distressing, hoarse sound that tore at Ethan's heart. But Trish didn't move, didn't adjust, didn't even glance toward the nursery. When Mary arrived 15 minutes early for her shift, she dropped her keys on the entry table, froze, and immediately quickened her pace toward the nursery. Her expression shifted from calm to deeply concerned as soon as she pushed open the door. Ethan leaned closer to the monitor as her hands flew to her mouth for a moment, overwhelmed by the sight of 3 red-faced, trembling infants. Without hesitation, she scooped up Aiden, first the one who tended to cry the hardest, and rocked him gently against her chest. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. She simply held him, pressing her cheek against his soft hair. The camera picked up her voice in a low, soothing tone as she whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart, I'm here now." Aiden's cries quieted almost instantly. That alone told him everything he needed to know about how much comfort Maria provided. Maria carefully placed Aiden in a baby carrier against her chest, allowing her arms to hold the other two. She lifted Liam and Noah, settling them against her hips with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Her movements were practiced, instinctive, fluid. She spoke to them through every second of it, soft, warm words that carried reassurance even through the security feed. I know. You've been waiting too long, let's fix that, okay? Let's get you changed, fed, and cozy again." Ethan watched her head into the kitchen, moving with determination but also gentleness. She warmed bottles, tested the temperature on her wrist, and fed each baby with care and patience. She didn't prop the bottles. She didn't rush. She held each child, giving them individual attention, stroking their cheeks, humming a soft tune. The babies melted into her. Their breathing slowed, their hands relaxed. The tension that filled the house just moments earlier vanished. Maria didn't do it because it was her job. She did it because her heart couldn't leave a baby in distress. Ethan knew that truth with absolute certainty. But the moment that struck him deepest happened after the babies were fed, changed and tucked safely into their bouncy seats in the living room. Maria sat between them on the rug, stretching her legs forward, letting each baby reach for her fingers. She looked at them with a softness that felt powerful even through a screen. "You three deserve the world," she murmured. "I wish your mama could see you now, she would be so proud." The babies cooed back at her, lifting their tiny fists in the air. Maria pressed a kiss to each of their foreheads, one at a time, as though sealing her words into their skin. Ethan wasn't sure when his vision blurred, but he wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand before the tears could fall. He hadn't known her relationship with the boys was that deep. He hadn't known she talked to them like that, loved them like that. And then something unexpected happened. Julia, Maria's 5-year-old daughter, appeared in the doorway, clutching a small stuffed bear. She had come along that day because her babysitter canceled. Ethan watched as she approached Maria with cautious steps. "Mommy," she whispered. Maria looked up, smiling at her warmly. "Hi, Mija, come say hi to the boys." Julia sat down gently next to her mother, still clutching her bear, and reached out to touch Noah's tiny foot. "They're so little," she said in a tone filled with wonder, "and so cute." Maria laughed softly. "They are. And they love when you talk to them." Julia began babbling to the triplets, introducing her stuffed bear, telling them about preschool, about her favorite book, about how she wanted to teach them all the songs she knew. The babies reacted with fascination. Aiden tried to grab the bear. Liam stared at her like she was the most interesting thing in the room, and Noah kicked happily. Ethan watched the scene unfold with a warmth spreading through his chest. There was something profoundly beautiful about the way Julia instantly connected with the boys, and the way Maria's eyes glowed with pride watching her daughter interact with them. For the next hour, Maria and Julia transformed the nursery floor into a little bubble of comfort. Maria held one baby while Julia entertained the other two. Their laughter filled the house, mixing with the gentle coos of the triplets. Ethan couldn't tear his eyes away from the screen. This right here was what real family looked like. Not staged photos. Not embellished stories for the media, not fake affection. Maria brought life into every room she entered. She brought warmth into the cold spaces Trish left behind. And Julia, young as she was, carried the kind of sincerity that couldn't be taught. The more Ethan watched, the more the truth settled heavily in his chest. His sons weren't just safe with Maria, they were loved. Truly loved. They were cherished, they were understood. They were nurtured in ways they desperately needed. And as he watched Julia kiss Noah's forehead, watched Maria tuck blankets around the boys, watched the babies relax as though the world finally made sense, Ethan made a quiet vow within himself. He would protect this connection. He would protect these children. And he would protect the woman who had shown them the kind of love that didn't need to be asked for. Because if there was one thing the footage proved, it was this: Maria wasn't just an employee. She was the anchor his children had been clinging to all along. The more Ethan watched Maria care for the triplets, the more he realized just how deeply her presence shaped the rhythm of his home. It wasn't simply that she fed and changed them. It wasn't even that she soothed them better than anyone else. It was the way she anticipated their needs before they fully expressed them. The way she moved with a kind of intuitive understanding that came only from genuine affection. And in those small moments ones Trish never paid attention to, Ethan saw something unmistakable. The babies adored her. They didn't just tolerate her. They adored her with the instinctive trust that infants reserved for the people who consistently comforted them. This hit Ethan with a force he didn't expect. Every morning when Mary arrived, the triplets responded instantly. They kicked their legs, flailed their arms, and made excited little sounds that Ethan had never heard them make for Trish. Even if Maria entered quietly, even if she tried not to disturb them, the boys sensed her presence. Their eyes lit up. Their tiny bodies wiggled in anticipation. For infants who were only 3 months old, their emotional reactions were unmistakable. The monitors didn't lie. Ethan saw it in real time, day after day. One Thursday morning, the footage captured something that solidified Maria's place in the baby's emotional world. The triplets had been unusually fussy since dawn. Ethan had left early for a meeting, and Trish, as always, avoided the nursery by escaping to the patio with her coffee. The boys cried themselves into exhaustion twice before Maria even arrived. When she finally walked through the front door, she paused a brief second of stillness before hurrying toward the hall. She didn't set her bag down. She didn't change her shoes. She just moved with urgency, heading directly for the nursery. The babies reacted the moment her footsteps approached. Even through the monitor, Ethan saw Noah lift his tiny head, saw Liam's legs start kicking, saw Aiden's cries shift into softer whimpers. It was as if they recognized the pattern of her movement, the cadence of her steps. And when she opened the door, the boys immediately calmed, their cries breaking into relieved coos. Maria pressed a hand to her chest as if the sight overwhelmed her. "Oh, my sweet boys," she murmured, gathering them one by one. "I'm here now, I got you." Ethan watched her movements with growing appreciation. She scooped Aiden into her arms, rested him against her shoulder, and rubbed his back with slow, rhythmic strokes. She leaned over Liam's crib and tapped his tummy gently before giving him his pacifier. She lifted Noah into her other arm, balancing 2 babies effortlessly. Her expression softened into something fuller than affection, something closer to devotion. And the babies responded in kind, relaxing into her touch, their faces smoothing into calm contentment. It was a moment Ethan replayed 3 times before he could pull himself away from the monitors. But what truly struck him wasn't just the baby's emotional connection to Maria, it was the way she treated them like extensions of her own heart. She never rushed, even when she was clearly tired. She never complained, not once, and she never treated caregiving as a chore. She did it the way love naturally expressed itself, through small, consistent acts of devotion. Ethan found himself watching more than he meant to. Not because he distrusted her, quite the opposite. He was learning from her, studying her tenderness, observing her patience, absorbing the unspoken truths of caregiving. Many nights after everyone was asleep, he replayed clips of Maria rocking the boys to sleep. He studied her technique, her gentle sway, the way she supported their necks, the way she whispered to them as if the words themselves carried warmth. He learned how to mimic her touch, her tone, her timing. And slowly he began modeling these behaviors when he held his sons, finding comfort in knowing he was learning from someone who cared for them so deeply. One afternoon, a moment occurred that Ethan couldn't shake for days. Maria had settled on the nursery rug with the babies spread across her lap, Aiden resting against her thigh, no chewing on her finger. Liam curled near her chest. She laughed as Julia placed tiny stuffed animals around them like guardians. Ethan listened to their laughter echo through the monitors. The warmth, the closeness, the comfort, it was everything he had hoped the boys would experience when he chose to adopt them. He watched Maria lift each baby and kiss their forehead, whispering, "You re safe, you re loved, you re not alone." It was such a natural gesture, so instinctive that Ethan found himself gripping his desk to steady the atch rising inside him. A few minutes later, Maria took out her phone not to record or post, but to show Julia a photo, and as she scrolled, Ethan caught sight of something unexpected. A screenshot of the triplets sleeping, a photo of Aiden holding her finger, a picture of Liam smiling during tummy time, another of Noah wrapped in a blanket. They weren't professional photos. They weren't curated or edited. They were moments she cherished privately. Moments she captured because they meant something to her. That discovery floored Ethan more than any footage he had seen so far. She didn't just care for the triplets, she loved them, deep, quietly, without asking for anything in return. Later that evening in the office, Ethan stared at the monitors long after the house had gone dark. The screen showed the nursery calm, peaceful, safe. The boys slept soundly, their tiny chests rising and falling in unison. And Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Real hope. Because no matter how much darkness the footage revealed about Trish, it also illuminated something else just as powerfully. The triplets had someone in their corner. A protector, a woman who treated them with unconditional love. For the first time since the surveillance began, Ethan's heart felt lighter, because the babies weren't just reacting to Maria. They were connecting with her, forming bonds, recognizing her voice, her touch, her scent. They trusted her, they adored her. And that wasn't something that could be forced or faked. That level of comfort only grew from genuine care. Ethan realized then that the connection between Maria and the triplets wasn't accidental. It was the most real thing in his house. He also realized that one day, he would have to tell her the truth that he had witnessed every moment of her compassion through a lens. And when that day came, he hoped she understood it wasn't surveillance of her. It was surveillance of someone else, someone who had failed these children. Maria, on the other hand, had become the one person who held the entire household together with nothing but love and honesty. And because of that, Ethan knew the future of his family, his real family, would inevitably revolve around the woman whose heart recognized his sons long before his own mind understood the depth of her devotion. Ethan didn't expect the next revelation to hit him with the force of a personal blow. Until then, everything he had uncovered about Trish and everything he had learned about Maria existed in two separate emotional worlds, one dark, one warm. But when he noticed how instinctively Maria behaved with the triplets, he began to sense there was something deeper beneath her tenderness, something that went beyond a kind heart or natural maternal instinct. There was a familiarity in the way she held the boys, a solemn understanding in her eyes when she soothed them, and a quiet heaviness in her expressions during moments she didn't think anyone was looking. It wasn't just compassion, it was connection. But Ethan couldn't yet pinpoint why. The clue came one late afternoon. The babies had been restless all day, especially Noah, who had been crying intermittently since dawn. Ethan watched through the monitor as Maria lifted him from the crib and held him close. She rocked him gently, humming a soft tune that didn't resemble anything he had heard before. The melody was soothing, delicate, and oddly sentimental. Ethan leaned closer to the screen, captivated by the way she stroked Noah's hair and murmured the same phrase over and over, "You okay, little star? Mommy's watching over you." At first, Ethan thought she was referring to herself. But then Maria looked up, her eyes glistening, and whispered, "I promised her I'd protect you." Ethan froze. He rewound the audio and listened again. This time, the words struck him deeper. Promised who? Why did her voice break like that? Why did she speak as though the babies belonged to someone she once knew? He stared at the footage long after she left the nursery, replaying the moment repeatedly until a thought he hadn't considered before began forming in the back of his mind. Had Maria known the boy's biological mother? The possibility unsettled him, not because he suspected foul play, but because it would explain everything: the tenderness, the guilt hidden beneath her warmth, the fiercely protective energy she displayed every time she held one of the babies. Ethan didn't want to jump to conclusions, but once the idea entered his mind, he couldn't shake it. He opened the adoption file, scrolling through the small amount of information available. The mother had been listed as Clarissa Rise, age 24, deceased shortly after birth. Ethan had never seen a portrait of her, only a name on paper. Later that evening, when the house was quiet and the babies slept peacefully, Ethan stared at the name again, Reyes. He had heard Maria mention that surname once when she was on the phone in Spanish, talking about a childhood friend. He didn't want to invade her privacy by replaying memories that weren't his to access, but the confusion gnawed at him relentlessly, so he returned to the footage. The next day, as Maria prepared the boys' bottles, she paused and gazed at the counter for a long moment. She whispered something in Spanish, too softly for the audio to catch clearly, but Ethan noticed the way she pressed a hand over her heart, as if fighting back an emotion she didn't want anyone to see. Julie entered the kitchen moments later, skipping happily, but when she saw her mother's expression, she walked over and wrapped her arms around her waist. Maria hugged her tightly and murmured, "Te lo promet, Clarissa, I'm doing everything I can." That confirmed it. Ethan leaned back in his chair, breath leaving him in a shaky exhale. Maria hadn't just known the baby's mother, she had loved her. She had made a promise. She had taken on the role of protector long before she ever set foot in his home. Everything suddenly made sense: her devotion, her urgency, her emotional reactions, the photos on her phone. The way she looked at the babies as though carrying a grief she had never shared with anyone. But the truth stirred something within Ethan that went beyond shock. It stirred compassion. He watched Maria the rest of the day with new understanding. When she held the boys, it wasn't just affection, it was loyalty to a promise made to someone she lost. When she comforted them, it wasn't just instinct, it was grief reshaped into love. He saw her tears when she believed she was alone. He saw the moments she pressed her forehead gently against one of the babies as though drawing strength from the contact. He saw how often she whispered their mother's name, too softly for the camera to capture, but visible through the gentle movement of her lips. And the babies responded to her as if they sensed the truth too. They clung to her shirt. They nuzzled into her neck. They calmed when her voice reached them. They smiled when she entered the room. Their bodies seemed to recognize her presence not simply as comfort, but as history, something that connected them to a mother they would never meet. The more Ethan understood, the heavier the realization became. Maria had stepped into his home carrying a story he never asked her to share. She had protected his children long before he even knew they existed. She had offered love that wasn't conditional or convenient. She had kept her promise while bearing the weight of a loss that clearly still lived inside her. One evening, Ethan found himself replaying earlier moments in the footage, when Maria hugged the babies a little longer than necessary or kissed their cheeks with a depth that felt heavier than simple affection. He felt humbled watching her love them through her grief. It was the kind of devotion people rarely saw, the kind of strength that revealed itself only in private moments. And the thought that Trish had dismissed this woman, had belittled her, talked down to her, treated her as if she were beneath the household, ignited a new fury in Ethan he couldn't ignore. The surveillance had begun as a search for truth about Trish. Instead, it unveiled a truth about Maria, one that changed everything. She wasn't just an employee. She wasn't just a kind woman with maternal instincts. She was a guardian born of loyalty, love, and loss. She was the bridge between the boys' past and their future. She was the first real sense of family his sons had known after the tragedy of their birth. And as Ethan continued watching through the night, he felt gratitude swell inside him with a force he couldn't contain. Gratitude for her heart. Gratitude for her presence. Gratitude for the promise she had kept so fiercely, even though no one had asked her to. He didn't know how to approach her with what he had learned, not yet. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty: whatever future he built for his sons, Maria Santos needed to be part of it. Not out of obligation, not out of sympathy, but because she was the one person who had already shown them what unconditional love looked like. And Ethan Walker was done letting that kind of love go unnoticed. The truth settled over Ethan like a weight he couldn't shake, not crushing, but reshaping, rewriting everything he thought he understood about the people inside his home. Maria Santos wasn't simply nurturing by nature. She wasn't just a compassionate woman doing her job well. She was someone who had stepped into his sons' lives with a purpose that ran deeper than he could have imagined. She had known their biological mother, she had loved her, and she had made a promise that extended far beyond duty. Once Ethan accepted that, something inside him shifted. He couldn't keep watching from afar. He needed to understand the entire story: how Maria ended up here, why she chose to work in his home instead of approaching him directly, and what exactly happened to the woman who entrusted him with 3 beautiful, fragile lives. He needed to know everything. The next morning, Ethan woke early. He didn't turn on the monitors immediately. For the first time since installing the cameras, he didn't need to. He already knew what he would see: Trish ignoring the babies while playing with her phone, Maria stepping in to rescue them, Julia squeezing between her mother and the triplets like she belonged there. Instead of watching, he sat at his desk and stared at the adoption documents. The name Clarissa Reyes pulled at him with new significance. He imagined a young woman, frightened, overwhelmed, possibly alone, giving birth to 3 infants against all odds. He imagined her handing them over to the system because she couldn't give them the life she wanted. He imagined her final hope being placed in Maria's hands. And he imagined Maria carrying that hope like a torch straight into his home. Ethan swallowed hard and leaned back, overwhelmed by a mix of admiration and heartbreak. He didn't want to interrogate Maria. He didn't want to corner her or make her feel exposed. She had kept her secret for a reason. But he couldn't ignore the truth any longer. He needed to ask her gently, privately, and hear her side of the story. He needed to know why she never said a word. That afternoon, an opportunity presented itself naturally. Maria was in the kitchen preparing bottles while Julia played with building blocks near the island. Ethan stepped inside, clearing his throat so he wouldn't startle her. Maria glanced up with a soft smile that always seemed to appear when he entered a room. "Oh, hi, Mr. Walker. I'm just warming their next feed." "Please," he said quietly, "call me Ethan." The shift in his tone caught her off guard. She blinked, nodding slowly before returning her attention to the bottles. He stepped closer, leaning against the counter beside her. "Maria, can we talk for a moment, just us?" Her hands stilled. Fear flickered across her eyes for the briefest seconds, so quick Ethan would have missed it if he weren't watching her so closely. She nodded again, more cautiously this time, as though preparing herself for something she didn't want to face. He waited until Julia wandered into the living room before speaking again. "I want to ask you something," he said gently. "And I want you to know I'm not upset. I'm not angry, I just need clarity." Maria placed the cap on one of the bottles and breathed in slow, steadying herself. "Of course, what is it?" "Did you know the triplets' mother?" The question landed between them like a fragile object that could shatter if handled too roughly. Maria froze completely this time. Her shoulders tensed, her gaze lowered, and her breath hitched in her chest. For several long seconds, she didn't speak. When she finally looked up, her eyes were full of something Ethan couldn't quite name: fear, sadness, and an H that went far beyond the present moment. "Yes," she whispered, voice thick. "I knew her. I knew her better than anyone." Ethan nodded slowly, giving her space. "Was she someone close to you?" Maria swallowed, tears pooling at the corners of her eyes. "She was my best friend, my sister in every way except blood. We grew up together, we survived things together." Her voice cracked, but she kept speaking. "She was the bravest girl I ever knew." "Her name was Clarissa," Ethan murmured, giving the name the reverence it deserved. Maria nodded. "Clarissa Reyes. She was only 24. She got pregnant unexpectedly. She tried so hard to figure out a way to keep the boys to work while carrying 3, to save enough money, to prepare something safe for them. But her pregnancy was difficult, too difficult. She got sick, really sick, before the birth." Maria wiped at her cheek when a tear escaped. "She called me one night crying, saying she didn't think she would make it. I told her she would, that she was strong enough, but she asked me to promise something." Ethan didn't move. He didn't breathe. He knew what was coming before she even spoke the next sentence. "She asked me to make sure her boys never felt abandoned, to make sure they grew up loved, to protect them if she couldn't." Maria paused, pressing a hand to her heart as though steadying it. "I promised her. I promised her with my whole soul." Ethan felt his throat tighten, and after he couldn't finish the sentence. Maria nodded again. "She died a few hours after giving birth. No relatives, no income, no safety net. The hospital had no choice but to place them into the foster system." She exhaled shakily. "I wanted to take them. I begged the social worker to let me, but I was working 3 jobs, raising Julia alone. I didn't qualify. I couldn't give them what they needed, and it broke me." Ethan reached out instinctively, placing a gentle hand on her arm. Maria stiffened in surprise, but she didn't pull away. "When I found out someone adopted them," she continued softly, "I prayed it was someone good, someone loving. When I learned it was you, I applied for the housekeeping position the same week. I didn't know how else to stay close. I didn't know if you'd ever want me involved. But I knew I had made a promise, and I wasn't going to break it." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Her truth hit him harder than any revelation he'd uncovered through the cameras. When he opened them again, he saw not just a woman standing before him, but the pillar who had held his family together without him even realizing it. "Maria," he whispered, voice thick, "you didn't just keep your promise. You gave them everything. More than I could have asked anyone to give." She shook her head quickly, wiping her tears. "No, Ethan, I didn't give them everything. You did. You took them in. You gave them a home, a future. You saved them." Ethan's chest tightened, and he stepped closer without thinking, his voice warm and steady. "Maybe we both did." Maria's expression softened in a way he had never seen before, raw, vulnerable, honest. And in that moment, Ethan knew something for certain. The promise she made to Clarissa had brought her into his life, into his children's lives, for a reason far bigger than any of them understood yet. Once Ethan learned the truth about Maria's connection to Clarissa and the boys, everything around him sharpened with a clarity he hadn't possessed before. The resentment he once held toward Trish for her indifference transformed into something far more dangerous: determination. Determination to protect his sons. Determination to protect the woman who had already protected them for months. Determination to expose the truth and end the cycle of deceit that had been poisoning his home. And as he continued to observe Trish through the cameras, he discovered that her negligence wasn't a moment of weakness or stress. It was a pattern, a mindset, a choice, and that choice escalated with each passing day. What began as irritation grew into something more calculating. On several recordings, Trish discussed her future with friends through phone calls, never once mentioning the boys with affection. Instead, she spoke about them as obstacles, using words like baggage, burden, and career killer. Ethan's jaw tightened every time he heard it. But then came the recording that changed everything. It was a Wednesday morning. The footage showed Trish on a video call with someone from her management team. Her face was perfectly made up, her hair styled as if she had a photo shoot to attend, even though she had been ignoring the crying triplets for nearly 20 minutes. She leaned back in the chair, sipping her overpriced latte, as she said, "He's getting way too attached to these kids. I thought the novelty would wear off, but it's like he forgot what his life was before them. He doesn't go anywhere anymore. Doesn't travel, doesn't take me to events. It's like he traded me for bottles and burp cloths." Her manager must have asked what she planned to do, because she scoffed and shook her head. "I'm working on it. Trust me. He adores me. I just need him to see that raising 3 babies at once is too much for someone like him. If he starts to believe that, then he'll do the logical thing." Ethan leaned forward in his office chair, pulse spiking. "Logical thing." Trish continued, crossing her legs with a casual confidence that made Ethan's stomach churn. I mean, think about it. He's rich. He's handsome. He can always adopt again later. We can adopt a baby together. One we choose, not 3 that were dumped on him. I'm just helping him realize what he truly wants. And once I convince his mom and brother that these kids are holding him back, he'll listen. Family influence works wonders. Ethan stopped breathing for several seconds. She planned to manipulate him. She planned to manipulate his family. She planned to dismantle the life he had built with his sons simply because she saw them as obstacles to her lifestyle. Then came the final blow. Trish leaned closer to the camera and lowered her voice. Worst case, I'll make life unbearable here. The mess, the noise, the exhaustion, it's already getting to him. Once I push it a little further, he'll fold. He'll return them to the system out of sheer stress. And when he does, I'll be right there to comfort him. He'll think it was his idea. Ethan rose from his chair so fast that it toppled backward. His vision blurred with anger so fierce it felt physical. If Trish were standing in front of him in that moment, he wasn't sure he could have stopped himself from shouting. Manipulating him was one thing. Manipulating his family was another. But manipulating his children's safety and stability, treating their lives like chess pieces she could rearrange, was unforgivable. He closed his eyes, dragging in a slow breath as he gripped the edge of the desk. He needed a plan, a thoughtful one, a decisive one. Confronting her immediately would ruin his chance at collecting the full range of evidence needed to sever her connection cleanly and permanently. She was cunning, almost disturbingly so, and if she sensed his suspicion, she would pivot, manipulate, twist the truth until she painted herself as the victim. He couldn't allow that, not when the safety of the boys depended on him. So for the next week, Ethan watched her even more closely than before. The more footage he collected, the more monstrous her behavior revealed itself to be. She didn't just neglect the boys. She actively sabotaged their care. She intentionally waited too long to feed them, then complained that they ate too much. She ignored diaper changes, then scolded Maria for the smell. She opened windows in the nursery during cool mornings just to air it out, then blamed the boys for getting congested. She made messes and blamed Julia. She moved baby items out of reach to inconvenience Maria. But the part that cut deepest wasn't her manipulation, it was the way she treated Maria. The recordings showed her belittling Maria every chance she got. You missed a spot on the counter, she'd snap, even when the counter gleamed. Do you even know how to hold a baby right? She'd say moments after Maria had calmed the boys from a crying spell Trish caused. And once when Maria quietly suggested adjusting the baby's feeding schedule, Trish leaned in and hissed, "Don't forget your place." Watching that footage made Ethan's stomach twist with disgust. Maria had done nothing but love, protect, and nurture his sons. She had given them the kind of care he could only aspire to learn. And Trish had treated her like she was beneath the family she held together. That was the moment Ethan realized confrontation wasn't enough. He needed to expose Trish fully publicly. No, his sons didn't deserve that kind of drama. But privately, absolutely, she needed to face his family, the people she planned to manipulate. She deserved to have her lies collapse in front of the audience she valued most, the ones she had been pretending for. Ethan devised a plan. He would invite his family for a dinner. Trish would assume it was the beginning of a proposal. She would dress up expecting to be celebrated. And then, in front of everyone she intended to deceive, Ethan would reveal the footage, the neglect, the insults, the manipulation. Every truth she had buried beneath her polished facade. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. Justice for the babies she wronged. Justice for the woman she mistreated. Justice for the life she tried to dismantle. Ethan felt a calmness settle over him once the plan was set. He stopped feeling guilty for watching the cameras. He stopped second-guessing his instincts. He stopped hoping she would change. The truth was undeniable. Trish Coleman didn't belong in his home. She didn't belong in his story. And she certainly didn't belong anywhere near his children. Whatever happened next wasn't just about exposing her. It was about reclaiming his family. Once Ethan had gathered enough evidence to paint the full picture of Trish's cruelty, manipulation, and disregard, he knew the next step had to be executed with precision. He couldn't simply confront her in private. She was too skilled at twisting narratives, too practiced in playing the victim, too adept at redirecting blame onto whoever stood closest. If he cornered her alone, she would cry, insist she was overwhelmed, claim she needed support, and beg for another chance. Worse, she could claim Ethan misunderstood or manipulated her words. She could threaten to expose him for using cameras in his own home. She could spin the story until the truth dissolved beneath her theatrics. No, Ethan needed witnesses, people Trish wanted to impress, people she wouldn't dare try to deceive openly, people whose opinions she valued more than honesty itself. His family. He decided the confrontation needed to take place during a formally planned dinner, one that Trish would misinterpret as a proposal. Ethan loathed the idea of letting her believe something so meaningful. But the alternative was worse, allowing her to continue thinking she could manipulate him into sacrificing his sons. That night would be the turning point for all of them. She would walk into the dining room expecting diamonds, applause, and admiration. Instead, she would be handed the truth she had earned, the truth she could no longer run from. Ethan began the preparations days in advance. He invited his mother, Helena, whose intuition had always been sharp and whose fairness he trusted deeply. He invited his older brother Ryan and his wife Kelly, both of whom loved the triplets fiercely. He asked his family to arrive at the Santa Barbara home precisely at 6 o'clock. He didn't explain the reason in the invitation. He only said it was important. Helena called him twice to ask if everything was all right. He assured her it would be. Ryan texted, joking that maybe Ethan was finally going to put a ring on it, and Ethan stared at the message for several moments before forcing a neutral response. He hated lying, especially to his brother, but he reminded himself it was necessary. On the morning of the dinner, Ethan woke up with an unusual heaviness in his chest. He lay in bed for several minutes, mentally rehearsing the events that would unfold. He imagined Trish's face when the footage appeared on the living room screen. He imagined her initial denial, her panic, her desperate attempts to control the narrative. He imagined his mother's stunned expression, Ryan's fury, Kelly's disgust. And in contrast, he imagined Maria in the nursery at that exact moment, feeding the babies with her gentle smile, completely unaware that the truth she had carried alone for months was finally about to surface. Before he rose, he checked the monitors one last time, not out of suspicion, but out of habit. As expected, the triplets were in their bouncers on the living room floor. Maria sat between them, singing softly while Julia danced around with a princess cape tied around her shoulders. The boys giggled, flailing their arms with unrestrained joy. Maria clapped along, smiling as Julia twirled clumsily. Ethan watched them with warmth swelling through his chest. This energy, this life, this love was everything worth fighting for. Meanwhile, Trish was upstairs in the master bathroom, curling her hair, applying a thick layer of makeup, and rehearsing her proposal reaction in the mirror. She had no idea what was coming. She hummed to herself, completely oblivious to the reality that her image was about to implode in front of the very people she wanted to impress. As the day passed, Ethan prepared the dining room. A long mahogany table stretched across the center, decorated with white lilies and candles. The setup was elegant and sophisticated, a scene Trish would expect for a proposal. Ethan placed the monitor's remote inside his blazer pocket, checking it twice. He tested the living room projector setup he had connected earlier that morning, ensuring the footage was cued and ready. Every technical detail mattered. He wasn't about to give Trish a chance to claim the recordings were edited or fabricated. By late afternoon, the house hummed with anticipation. Maria had taken the boys to the backyard to let them kick their legs in the warm ocean breeze. Julia sat on the patio with a coloring book. Ethan walked outside to check on them, and the moment Maria glanced up and smiled, something in his chest steadied. "Everything okay?" she asked gently. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, everything will be after tonight." She noticed something in his tone, something serious, and her expression shifted, but she didn't pry. She had earned his trust long before this day, and she trusted him in return. At 5:50, the doorbell rang. Helena arrived first, embracing Ethan warmly. Ryan and Kelly followed shortly afterward. They greeted the babies joyfully, laughing at their little outfits and kissing their tiny foreheads. Trish watched from the balcony upstairs, wearing a shimmering champagne-colored dress. Her lips curled into a triumphant smile. She walked down the stairs like a woman descending a stage platform, expecting applause. "Ethan," she said dramatically, "you look incredible." She looped her arm through his and kissed his cheek with a flourish. Ethan kept his expression neutral as he guided her into the dining room. She didn't notice his stiffness. She didn't notice his family exchanging curious glances. All she saw was the stage being set for her. Dinner began smoothly enough. Trish dominated the conversation, bragging about upcoming brand partnerships, showing off her manicure and hinting at big news coming. Helena listened politely but didn't hide the frown lines that deepened each time Trish dismissed anything related to the children. Ryan exchanged several glances with Ethan, clearly sensing something felt off. Maria stayed in the nursery with the boys, feeding them and keeping Julia entertained. She didn't step into the dining room. She never assumed she belonged there, despite Ethan wishing she would. Finally, when dessert arrived, Ethan stood. "I want to say something," he began, his voice even but strong. Trish beamed, straightening her dress, ready for her moment. "But before I do, I need you all to see something." Her smile faltered just slightly. Ethan walked to the projector screen and pressed the remote in his pocket. The room dimmed, The footage began to play. At first, it showed the babies crying alone while Trish scrolled through her phone. Then it showed her cursing under her breath at the boys, then ignoring them, then laughing as she told a friend she planned to manipulate Ethan into returning them, then belittling Maria, then mocking the triplets' existence. Each clip cut through the room like a blade. Helena gasped, covering her mouth. Kelly's eyes widened with horror. Ryan stood, fists clenched, fury radiating off him. The sound of Trish's own voice filled the room, exposing her completely. No, this is out of context," she sputtered, shaking her head frantically. "This isn't fair, Ethan!" "You can't, this isn't. It's the truth," Ethan said quietly but firmly, "and you will not twist it tonight." Trish's face crumbled into panic. She looked around for sympathy but found none. Not even from Ethan, especially not from Ethan. And in that moment, surrounded by the very people she once hoped to manipulate, her lies finally collapsed. The room descended into a stunned heaviness that clung to the walls like humidity. The footage ended, but its echo remained: images of 3 helpless babies crying in their cribs. Recordings of Trish complaining that they were ruining her life. Clips of her plotting to get rid of them. Each moment replayed itself inside every mind at the table, imprinting a truth none of them could ignore. Trish stood trembling, her flawless makeup doing little to hide the panic spreading across her face. She looked around the dining room for an ally, a believer, a sympathetic audience, anyone who might defend her. But all she found were expressions of shock, anger, and disappointment. "Ethan, baby, you know I would never. This is being twisted," she stammered, stepping toward him as if proximity could erase her actions. "It's edited. Someone is messing with you. Someone is trying to make me look bad." Helena rose from her chair, her voice trembling with betrayal. "We just watched hours of you targeting children. That is not an edit. That is your behavior." She shook her head, unable to hold back the hurt in her eyes. "I welcomed you into this family. I trusted you with my grandsons." Trish's lips parted, but no words came. She stepped back as though Helena's disappointment physically pushed her. Ryan crossed his arms, jaw clenched tight enough to crack a tooth. "You treated those babies like props," he said bluntly. "And on top of that, you went after Maria, the woman who actually takes care of them." Kelly didn't speak at first. Instead, she turned to Ethan, tears of anger filling her eyes. "I don't know how you held all this inside," she whispered. "I don't know how you kept your composure long enough to get this proof." She then shifted her glare to Trish. "You were lucky he didn't throw you out the second he saw that footage." The criticism came from every direction, not in a roaring storm, but in steady, controlled waves, each one pounding into Trish until her confidence crumbled. She turned back to Ethan, eyes wide and glossy with desperation. "You were supposed to love me," she said, voice cracking. "We were supposed to build a life together." Ethan stood tall, steady, and colder than she had ever seen him. "Love isn't possible where cruelty exists," he replied. "And what you did to my sons, that is cruelty." "They were not even your real kids," she screamed, suddenly turning vicious, the last shred of her composure shattering. "You picked them up out of nowhere because you felt lonely, and you expect everyone to worship them like they're some miracle." Helena gasped sharply. Kelly stood so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. Ryan took a threatening step forward, but Ethan lifted a hand, stopping him. "They may not share my din," Ethan said, voice steady, "but they are my children, my sons, my heart. And anyone who cannot see that does not belong in their lives or in mine." Trish's breath hitched. Her gaze darted to the doors, the windows, anywhere she might escape judgment. "I didn't mean it," she whispered weakly. "I was stressed, I was overwhelmed. I just wanted us to have a clean start, a normal start." Ethan's expression didn't soften. "You wanted me without my sons. That will never happen. Not now, not ever." His calmness terrified her more than anger ever could. She reached for him again, but he stepped back. "You need to leave, Trish," he said firmly, "tonight." Her jaw dropped. "You re-throwing me out? After everything I sacrificed for you?" "What exactly did you sacrifice?" Ryan snapped. "Your comfort, your vanity. Your time spent making yourself look good on camera." Trish glared at him, then looked back at Ethan. "I loved you." "No," Ethan said, shaking his head. "You loved the idea of me, the idea of being in my world, but you never loved me. And you certainly never cared for my sons." She opened her mouth again, but Ethan turned away, giving her no more chances, no more attention, no more pieces of himself. "I'll have someone pack your things," he said over his shoulder. "You can pick them up tomorrow. Or never." Humiliation washed over Trish's face like a tidal wave. For a moment she looked small, stripped of her glamour, stripped of her illusion of control. Her eyes darted toward Ethan's family again, but they all stared at her with nothing but contempt. No one shielded her. No one softened the blow. Helena spoke last, her voice filled with a deep, maternal disappointment. "You could have cared for them," she said. "You could have loved them. You could have been part of something beautiful. Instead, you chose selfishness." She gestured toward the door. "Go." before you embarrass yourself further." The finality in Helena's tone shattered whatever stubbornness Trish had left. She grabbed her purse, her heels clicking unevenly as she rushed to the door. She didn't look back, not once. The front door slammed, echoing through the house with a tremor that felt like the end of something toxic and the clearing of something necessary. The room remained still for a long moment after her departure. The candles flickered, the dishes sat untouched. The weight of the confrontation lingered in the air. Finally, Helena exhaled shakily. "You did the right thing," she said to Ethan. Ryan nodded, sitting back down. "She was poison." Kelly touched Ethan's arm gently. "I'm just glad the boys are safe." Ethan didn't speak right away. He swallowed, emotions tightening his throat. Relief, anger, exhaustion, and a sharp ache swirled inside him. But one emotion rose above all the others: protectiveness. "I should check on the boys," he said softly. His family nodded, understanding completely. As Ethan walked toward the nursery, a weight lifted from his chest with each step. Not because the confrontation had been easy, because it hadn't. It tore through him in places he didn't expect. But because the truth was now out in the open. Trish was gone, his sons were safe. And the woman who had loved them first, the woman who had promised to protect them, was still there. When he reached the nursery, he stood in the doorway for a moment. Maria sat on the rug with the triplets, each one nestled comfortably in her arms or lap. Julia sat beside her, telling a story only the babies seemed to appreciate. Maria looked up when she sensed his presence, her eyes softened, full of warmth and worry. "Is everything okay?" she asked gently. Ethan stepped inside, a quiet resolve settling in his chest. "It will be," he answered. "From now on it truly will be." Because the storm had passed. And what remained was the beginning of something real. After Trish stormed out of the house and the door slammed behind her, the energy in the mansion shifted in a way Ethan hadn't expected. It wasn't just relief, it was release. For months, tension had hovered like an unseen shadow, creeping into corners, settling into rooms, affecting even the babies who couldn't understand its source. With Trish gone, the air felt cleaner, lighter, almost breathable again. Ethan stood in the hallway outside the nursery for a moment, letting the quietness settle into him. He wasn't a man prone to second-guessing his decisions, but this one came with an unexpected layer of emotion: anger for what his sons had endured, gratitude for Maria's presence, sorrow for having let someone like Trish get so close, and an overwhelming determination to make everything right moving forward. When he stepped into the nursery, the sight awaiting him soothed every frayed part of him. The triplets were resting comfortably in their bouncers, their tiny chests rising and falling steadily, their faces calm in a way he hadn't seen in days. Maria sat on the floor with Julia leaning against her side, both of them watching the babies with soft affection. Maria lifted her gaze when she saw Ethan walk in, and the concern in her eyes spoke louder than any question she might have asked. Ethan gave her a small nod, one that told her everything she needed to know. It was done. Trish was gone. The danger was over. A gentleness washed through Maria's expression, but she didn't pry. Instead, she turned her attention back to the babies, adjusting nose blanket, brushing a curl from Aiden's forehead, reaching to hold Liam's tiny fist when he stretched in his sleep. Watching her filled Ethan with a strange warmth, one that hadn't fully settled into shape but grew bigger with every second. He didn't say it out loud, but he knew with absolute certainty that removing Trish was only step one. Step two, the part that mattered just as much, was repairing what she had damaged, not only in the physical sense but emotionally. His sons needed more stability than ever. They needed comfort, softness, consistency. And he needed to ensure that Maria, who had been their anchor since the beginning, understood how much she meant to this family. After the boys were settled in their cribs for a nap, Ethan walked Maria and Julia to the kitchen where he insisted she sit. Handing her a warm mug of tea, he prepared himself. She seemed flustered by the gesture, unused to him serving her, but she accepted with a quiet thank you. Julia happily munched on some crackers at the counter, unaware of the emotional heaviness lingering around their small group. Ethan pulled out a chair and sat across from Maria, his posture calm but purposeful. "I owe you more gratitude than I can ever express," he began, keeping his voice low so it wouldn't carry through the house. "What you've done for my boys, it goes beyond kindness, beyond responsibility. You protected them, loved them. You kept your promise to Clarissa, and without realizing it, to me too." Maria stared down at her tea, blinking rapidly as if holding back tears. "I didn't do anything anyone else wouldn't have done," she murmured, but Ethan gently shook his head. "That's not true. If anyone else had been in your position, those boys would still be suffering under Trish's care. You stepped in every single time. You saved them from so much." Maria finally looked up, and Ethan saw raw emotion in her eyes: grief for Clarissa, relief that the truth was out, and something that looked dangerously close to guilt. "I should have told you earlier," she whispered. I should have said something the moment I recognized them. But I was scared. I didn't know how you'd react. I didn't want to lose this job, and I didn't want to lose them. Ethan leaned forward, his voice steady but gentle. You could never lose them, or this job, or your place in this home. You belong here as much as anyone. The words hung between them, heavier than he intended, but truer than anything he had ever said. Maria exhaled shakily, brushing a tear from her cheek before it could fall. Clarissa wanted them to have a good life. She wanted them to be loved. When I saw how you looked at them the first time I came here, I knew she would be grateful. Ethan swallowed hard. I wish she could see them now, and see you. That made Maria smile, small, trembling, but real. Julia hopped off her stool and crawled into Maria's lap, wrapping short arms around her waist. Maria held her daughter close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Ethan watched them, struck by how naturally they fit in his kitchen, in his life, in the very space that once belonged to emptiness and grief. Without needing to think about it, he said, I want you two to stay here tonight, and tomorrow, and as long as you want. I'll set up a room for Julia, get whatever you need. You don't have to go back to that apartment, not now. Not ever unless you want to. Maria's eyes widened. Ethan, this is your home. I can't take advantage of your kindness. Yuri not, he said with a certainty that left no room for argument. You've already made it your home. You made it one long before I even realized it. That truth softened her expression into something tender. She didn't agree, not verbally, but she didn't protest again either. That was enough. Later that evening, after dinner with his family, and after the emotional aftermath had settled into something steadier, Ethan took a walk down the hallway and paused outside the nursery. Through the cracked door, he saw Maria sitting in the rocking chair with Noah against her chest, humming as Julia slept curled up on the guest bed with a blanket over her. The room wasn't just calm, it was safe, it was warm, it was whole in a way it had never been before. And Ethan realized with a clarity that rooted itself deep in his chest that the moment Trish walked out, the future of this home walked in, not in the form of romance or impulse, but something far more meaningful: trust, protection, possibility. He didn't know exactly what form his relationship with Maria would take. But he knew this: she wasn't just someone who worked for him. She wasn't just someone who cared. She was the heart of his family. And he would spend every day moving forward, proving to his sons and to her that she belonged here, that she always had. In the days following Trish's departure, the entire house felt different, lighter, calmer, almost reborn. The tension that once seeped into the walls vanished, replaced by an atmosphere that felt genuinely warm for the first time in months. Ethan noticed the shift immediately, not in dramatic ways, but in subtle ones. The babies slept more peacefully, their cries less frantic and more easily soothed. Julia giggled freely without Trish snapping at her for being too loud. Even Maria moved differently, her shoulders less tense, her expression brighter whenever she walked through the halls. It was as if everyone in the house had taken the same deep breath and finally exhaled. Ethan found himself lingering in doorways just to watch these small pockets of comfort unfold. He watched Maria guide Julia through a coloring activity at the kitchen table while the boys bounced happily in their seats. He watched her tuck blankets carefully around the triplets during naps, humming melodies that settled them immediately. He watched her reorganize the nursery with gentle efficiency, labeling drawers, arranging clothes, creating a space that felt thoughtful and intentional, something he hadn't seen in months. And he realized with an H that the home he envisioned when he decided to adopt was finally beginning to take shape. As the days blended, Ethan became increasingly aware of how naturally Maria fit into every corner of his life. She wasn't imposing or presumptuous. If anything, she still carried a humble uncertainty, as though she wasn't fully convinced she deserved a place in his home beyond her role. But Ethan saw differently. He saw the way the boys reached for her first when they were fussy, the way they calmed at her voice, the way she instinctively knew which baby needed attention even before they cried. He saw how Julia, despite her young age, began treating the triplets like her own brothers, sharing toys, patting their hands gently, calling them my babies when she thought no one was listening. There was a naturalness to their connection that couldn't be manufactured. Ethan found himself drawn to it, drawn to them, drawn to her, and with each passing day it became impossible to ignore. He also began noticing something he hadn't paid attention to before. Maria rarely took time for herself. She was always tending to the boys, or helping Julia with schoolwork, or cleaning something she had already cleaned earlier in the day. Ethan would find her up late folding laundry she insisted didn't need to be folded yet, or fixing a loose crib screw he'd planned to handle himself. It wasn't that she felt obligated, it was that she genuinely cared. But Ethan didn't want her to feel like her sense of duty was the only thing that tied her to his home. One afternoon, when he caught her scrubbing the stovetop, even though dinner hadn't been cooked yet, he gently took the sponge from her hand. "You deserve a break," he told her. "You don't have to carry everything." She tried to protest, but he shook his head with a soft smile. "Let me take care of something for once." She laughed, a warm, genuine sound that made something inside him shift. She agreed only because Julia tugged on her sleeve and asked her to build a block tower together. Ethan watched them both go with a feeling he hadn't expected, something close to contentment. Later that week, Helena stopped by unannounced to check on the boys. When she walked into the nursery and saw Maria sitting on the rug with all 4 children, Julia drawing pictures for the babies while Maria held Noah, something softened in her expression. She pulled Ethan aside in the hallway and whispered, "She's remarkable, you know." Ethan nodded, but Helena wasn't finished. "And those babies, they look at her the way children look at someone they trust completely. That's rare, Ethan. Don't take it for granted." Her words lingered in his thoughts long after she left the house. That evening, when Maria carried Liam upstairs for his bath, Ethan followed her, watching the way she held the baby against her chest, supporting him with confident warmth. He found himself wanting to say something, anything that would express the gratitude he felt, not just for her caretaking, but for the way she had stitched herself into the heart of his family without even trying. Instead, he simply said, "You're incredible with them," and watched her blush as though no one had ever complimented her in such a way. But the deeper shift happened one evening when the boys became unusually fussy from teething. Maria spent hours rocking them, alternating between warm compresses, soft songs, and patient snuggles. Ethan helped as much as he could, though he was nowhere near as instinctive as she was. At one point, while she held Aiden and he held Noah, their eyes met across the dim nursery. The exhaustion in her face mixed with something gentle, something vulnerable. Ethan felt an unexpected warmth climb into his chest. It wasn't romantic in the obvious sense, not yet, but it was something that could grow into romance if allowed the space. It was trust, admiration, and gratitude blending into a sensation he didn't want to push away. When the babies finally drifted off, Maria sagged onto the couch, her head tipping back with exhaustion. Ethan sat beside her, offering her a glass of water. Their hands brushed a soft, accidental connection that made both of them still for a moment too long. Neither spoke about it, but the air between them shifted. In the days that followed, Ethan's family began dropping subtle comments, noticing the change in him, noticing the natural closeness between him and Maria. Ryan teased him once, saying, "You smile more now," but Ethan didn't deny it. He didn't rush toward anything, didn't try to force moments that needed time to bloom, but he noticed her. He noticed her small laughs, her shy glances, her surprised reactions every time he did something kind for her. And he noticed how safe she made him feel, how safe she made his sons feel, how safe she made his entire home feel. By the end of the week, Ethan found himself standing in the nursery doorway late at night, watching Maria as she adjusted Noah's blanket. She had no idea he was there, no idea he was watching the way her hands move with unspoken affection. And as the boy curled into her touch, Ethan felt something inside him crystallize, as his home wasn't healing because Trish was gone. It was healing because Maria was here. And if he was brave enough, he knew exactly what the next chapter of their lives could look like. In the weeks following Trish's exit, Ethan's home began to feel like the very place he'd hoped it would become when he first brought the triplets home, warm, steady, and filled with genuine affection. The boys woke up cooing more often than crying, their little bodies relaxing into the routine Maria had helped establish. Julia adapted beautifully, slipping effortlessly into the role of honorary big sister, and Ethan found himself watching their little family dynamic bloom with a kind of awe he hadn't experienced before. But as the household healed, something inside Ethan began to shift in ways he hadn't anticipated. He caught himself looking at Maria differently, not in a sudden romantic burst, but in the soft, steady way one recognizes the importance of someone they've begun to rely on. He noticed the way she always placed her hand on each baby's chest for a second before laying them down, as if reassuring them they were safe. He noticed the way she laughed with her whole body when Julia did something silly. He noticed that she carried a strength shaped by hardship, but also a tenderness shaped by love. And he noticed that every time he walked into a room where she stood, something in his chest loosened, as if her presence reminded him he no longer had to shoulder everything alone. One evening, after a particularly long day of juggling work calls, diaper changes, and teething fussiness, Ethan found Maria in the kitchen preparing bottles while Julia dozed on a stool beside her. Her hair was tied into a loose bun, her cheeks slightly flushed from the warm stove, and yet she looked unmistakably like she belonged there. He leaned against the counter and watched her for a moment before speaking. "You know," he murmured, "I don't think this house would function without you." Maria turned, blinking as though surprised by the sincerity in his tone. "I'm just doing my job," she replied with a small smile, but Ethan shook his head. "No, it's more than that. You bring life into this home, peace, love. My boys, they happier because of you." Her smile faltered slightly, replaced by a softness that made his pulse pick up. "They make it easy to love them," she whispered. He stepped closer, not close enough to make her uncomfortable, but enough that she felt his presence. "Maybe," he said, "but not everyone chose to." Maria's gaze lowered for a moment, processing the weight of the statement. She didn't respond, but he noticed the way her shoulders relaxed as if relieved that someone finally acknowledged what she had carried alone for so long. Later that night, Ethan checked on the babies and found Maria already in the nursery, adjusting Noah's blanket. The dim light painted warmth across her features, and for a moment he simply watched, letting everything inside him settle into clarity. When she turned and caught him in the doorway, she smiled tiredly. "Long day?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Better now." The air between them grew thick with something unspoken, something neither of them dared name yet. Maria tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, clearly flustered. "I should get some rest," she murmured. "Julia's already asleep on the guest bed." Ethan stepped aside, letting her pass, but as she walked by, their arms brushed. The faint, accidental contact lingered longer than it should have, and Ethan found himself wondering, hoping if she felt it too. Over the following days, those small moments continued to add up, a shared laugh over Julia's dramatic toddler stories, their fingers brushing while buckling the boys into their carriers. The way her eyes softened whenever he held one of his sons confidently, using techniques she had taught him. And one afternoon, when a storm rolled in unexpectedly, Maria rushed outside to grab the laundry she had hung to dry. Ethan followed, helping her pull sheets and tiny clothes from the line as rain began to fall. They worked quickly, laughing breathlessly as the wind whipped around them. When they reached the doorway, dripping and clutching the last bundle of tiny shirts, they paused, faces close, breath mingling, a warmth forming between them that had nothing to do with the weather. Maria looked away first, cheeks flushed, but Ethan felt something settle inside him that refused to be ignored. Even his family began to see it. Helena visited one afternoon and watched as Ethan and Maria worked side by side preparing lunch. Maria stirred a pot on the stove while Ethan chopped vegetables, their conversation easy and natural, their movements in sync like two people who shared a rhythm without realizing they'd fallen into one. Helena nudged Ethan later in the hallway. "She cares for you," she whispered, "not because she has to, because it's in her nature. And you look at her like someone who finally found what he didn't know he was missing." Ethan didn't deny it. He couldn't, not anymore. What surprised him most wasn't how his feelings for Maria grew, it was how natural it felt. Nothing about it was rushed or forced. It was built through small moments that quietly stitched themselves into the foundation of his life. The way she always made sure Julia felt included. The way she put the baby's needs above everything else. The way she treated Ethan not as a boss or obligation, but as someone she respected and trusted. And just as important, Ethan began noticing something new in her too, a subtle shift in her eyes when he entered a room, a slight catch in her breath when he spoke gently to her, the soft pink in her cheeks whenever he complimented her. She didn't flirt, she didn't push boundaries, but she cared deeply. And it showed in all the small ways people reveal affection before they're brave enough to speak it. One evening, after the boys were asleep and Julia was curled on the couch watching cartoons, Ethan and Maria ended up in the backyard, drawn by the cool ocean breeze. They stood by the railing, looking out over the moonlit water, both lost in thought. Ethan finally broke the quiet with a low, heartfelt confession. "This house, it feels different now," he said, "better, fuller, happier, and that's because of you." Maria looked up at him, startled by the intensity of his tone, but she didn't look away. "I'm just grateful to be here," she said softly. "Grateful to keep my promise." Ethan stepped closer. "You've become more than that promise." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Maria's breath hitched, but she didn't back away. Instead, she whispered, "I don't want to overstep." Ethan shook his head. "You couldn't, not here, not with us." Their eyes held for a long moment, one filled with possibility, with questions neither needed to answer yet, with a tenderness that hinted at a future slowly unfolding between them. Ethan didn't rush toward her, Maria didn't rush toward him, but something shifted undeniably, something honest, something mutual, something that would grow naturally, slowly, and with intention. And for the first time since the triplets came home, Ethan felt certain about what the next chapter of his life might look like, not a replacement for what he had lost, but a new beginning built on love that grew from truth, sacrifice, and the kind of connection that could only come from shared devotion. A love that started not with romance, but with family. The story of Ethan, Maria, And the triplets carries a lesson that stretches far beyond the events inside one home. It reveals the truth about where love begins, how family is formed, and what it truly means to protect the people entrusted to us. At its core, this story reminds us that blood alone does not define family. Ethan became a father not through biology, but through commitment, sacrifice, and the willingness to love 3 infants abandoned by the world yet deserving of every kindness. Maria stepped into their lives not through obligation, but through a promise born from loyalty and heartbreak. Julia found brothers not through shared lineage, but through affection and innocence. Together they formed a family built on choices rather than circumstance. And that is the first lesson: family is created by the people who stay, care, and show up every single day, especially when it's hardest. The second lesson lies in the stark contrast between Trish and Maria. Trish is a reminder that appearances can deceive, and that not everyone who enters our lives does so with pure intentions. She performed love when eyes were on her but discarded it the moment no one was watching. Her affection was conditional, her kindness selective, her devotion non-existent. In contrast, Maria's love was built on selflessness, consistency, and humility. She never asked for recognition or rewards. She never pretended to be perfect. She simply loved the children because they needed love, and because she had promised someone she cared for that she would protect them. This contrast teaches us that character is not displayed when the world is watching, it is revealed in the moments no one sees. The true measure of a person lies in their unfiltered actions, their empathy when it is inconvenient, and the choices they make when kindness gives them nothing in return. Ethan's journey holds another powerful message: intuition matters. He sensed something was wrong long before he had evidence. Many people ignore their instincts out of fear of confrontation, fear of conflict, fear of being wrong. But Ethan dared to trust his inner whisper, the one that warned him of danger lurking behind Trish's pretty words and polished facade. Because he listened, he discovered the truth before irreversible damage could be done. His instinct saved his sons. It also opened his eyes to the presence of someone he had overlooked: Maria, whose goodness existed in quiet corners, waiting for him to truly see her. This teaches us that listening to our intuition is not paranoia, it is self-protection, and often the first step towards safeguarding the people we love. There is also a lesson in Maria's resilience and humility. She carried grief for her best friend, worry for 3 babies she could not legally adopt, and the weight of raising her own child alone. Yet she chose compassion every day. She treated the triplets with tenderness even when she could have distanced herself. She stayed patient under Trish's cruelty and never let bitterness infect her heart. Her strength wasn't the loud, triumphant kind, it was steady, enduring, and rooted in love. She teaches us that real strength isn't always visible. Sometimes it looks like someone who works tirelessly, sacrifices quietly, loves without taking credit, and keeps their promises even when life makes it difficult. Maria's love was the backbone of that household long before anyone realized it. Another important truth emerges through Ethan's willingness to take responsibility. Discovering Trish's actions devastated him not just because of her cruelty, but because he blamed himself for letting her near his children. Instead of ignoring his guilt, he transformed it into action. He confronted the problem, protected his sons, and created a safer future for them. His growth shows us that mistakes do not define us. What matters is how we rise from them. Ethan's courage in facing the truth, even when it hurt, demonstrates that real love requires accountability, honesty, and the determination to do what's right rather than what's easy. Finally, the most profound lesson from this story is that sometimes the family we dream of comes to us in unexpected forms. Ethan imagined fatherhood differently. Maria imagined her future differently. Neither expected their lives to merge. Yet through hardship, loss, and resilience, they found a shared purpose: a loving 3 children who needed both of them. Their story teaches us that love grows in the spaces left behind by pain, that healing often arrives through people we didn't expect, and that the most meaningful relationships are not forced, they unfold slowly, naturally, when hearts choose each other because of kindness, trust, and shared hope. In the end, this story reminds us that love is not defined by grand gestures, wealth, or social appearance. It is defined by everyday choices: the bottle fed at midnight, the baby held until sleep comes, the promise kept even when no one is watching. True love is steady, true love protects, true love nurtures without expectation. And the home Ethan built, reshaped by Maria's compassion and held together by the laughter of 4 children, stands as proof that love born from honesty and sacrifice can create a family stronger than anything selfishness could ever destroy. If you found this content helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of my latest videos. If you have any ideas or topics you'd like me to cover, leave a comment below. I always read all your comments.